And for the last 17 years, I've been running an outdoor mentoring program in Wichita, getting kids with programs like Big Brothers and Big Sisters opportunities to get out and go hunting and fishing. This last fall, we started a new initiative working with the high school trap teams. And last June, we were able to hire Brittany Waldman. And since she's running the program, I'm going to let her do the PowerPoint today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us here. This is my first commission meeting, so hopefully not my last either. I'm Brittany, so I just started with the Outdoor Mentors program in June, and I'm super excited. I've had some opportunity to kind of chat with some of you before this meeting, but have been chatting a little bit with you guys today too, and I'm excited to share with you what we're doing. So hopefully I won't bore you too much, but we are going to be talking a lot about the Kansas State Clay Target League here in Kansas. Started about 4 years ago, just a big booming population of kiddos, and we're just going to talk about how we're going to engage them in some hunting opportunities across the state. A little bit about us. Our mission has always been to provide outdoor opportunities, hunting, fishing, canoeing, hiking, you name it, to kids and provide them with a mentor. And so that's when Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and youth organizations like Youth Horizon come in handy. We can really match a young child with an adult who knows what they're doing in the outdoors and then supervise them through an official match. And that's been really successful with us for a long time. And so we're going to continue to do that. We have a really rich history actually with Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks. In 1999, that's when we officially started Pass It On Outdoor Mentors. In 2002, we were able to establish some funding and officially become a working, program under Big Brothers, Big Sisters, if you want to call it. In 2006, we were fortunate enough to spin off as our own 501c3, and that is our nonprofit status is what that means. And today, we are still working really hard getting kids outdoors hunting and fishing, and we host shooting clinics and provide a lot of continued efforts. And, roughly we served close to over 20,000 kids in the 17 years we've been going. And really, that's a lot of kudos to Mike and a lot of wonderful volunteers here in the room, too, who have provided time and effort and energy to get Kansas kids outdoors. So a little bit about our new program initiative is what we want to do is continue to provide continued hunting and outdoor opportunities to these high school trap shooting teams. We want to engage their coaches, we want to partner with local conservation groups, and then arrange land access and support a hunt. We think this is a pretty simple model to follow, but of course it takes a lot of key players involved and somebody to kind of lead the pack. And so far, we've had a lot of great people support us, and we're really thankful for that. As you all know, it takes a village to get any program off the ground and to keep it functioning. So aside from our financial support, we've had really great program support through the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism, a ton of NGO groups, as you can see, the Kansas Sport Hunting Association, organizations like Powderhook, which is an Outdoor Mentors digital media app, as well as the Kansas Hunting and Fishing Facebook page. So a little bit about the Kansas State High School Clay Target League. Started in 2016, and this last fall, this last spring, there were 74 confirmed high school teams across the state and over 1,800 students participating in the 2019 season. Now, if we wanted to broaden our horizon a little bit more, we could add 1,800 plus the 5,300 4-H shooting sports kiddos as well. So the shooting sports teams population is huge, and they're just low-hanging fruit, and they're just waiting to be engaged. And I think this is a really good opportunity and a good way for us to do that. A little bit about the league. There's 2 seasons, two seasons, a spring and a fall. Teams can choose to participate in both, or they can just do one. It can be students from grade 6 all the way up to 12th. The scores are accumulated at different competitions and submitted online, so you can track how you're doing within your league. They do like a 1A, 2A kind of classification, and it's not based on your school size, it's based on your shooting team size. And then, of course, athletes can also varsity letter in the sport, which is really fun. And more importantly, any student can compete. The picture up there is 2 kiddos from the Concordia trap shooting team, and We talked to Matt Farmer and Todd Robinson up there, and they're just tickled pink to have such a diverse group of students, shooting athletes really, on their team. I think they had like 56 this past season. So it's really fun to see girls and boys and kids of different abilities, and kids who are typically the football stars and kids who are usually in band all towing the same line and having a good time. Here's a little snapshot I always like to show. This is a map of Kansas, but also of every targeted school that has a team. So you can see we're talking all the way up in, Goodland, Kansas, down to Ulysses, and over to Humboldt, Kansas, up to Hiawatha, and of course we're pretty heavy there, central Wichita area as well. And this is really not even including some of the bigger school districts that we found. So we're from Wichita, and I know 259 isn't quite on board with this yet, or they just haven't started teams. I know some of the Blue Valley schools here in Kansas City haven't either. So this number could very well double, I think, in regards to getting some teams in there. So this past June, right when I was hired on, we decided to take some initiative and go out and survey some of these kids, because really we knew nothing about them. All we knew is that they had to have some type of hunter safety or gun safety class to join the team, and that they shoot a lot of skeet and trap. So they're probably pretty good shots. We really didn't have any idea if they were hunting, if they were interested in hunting, how often they went. So we just took our best shot at trying to sample this population. And at the state shoot, I think they had just shy of 1,000 student athletes there, and you don't have to qualify, so anybody can go. We're a pretty heavy male population, 82% versus female, and we surveyed about 325 participants. And what we found was actually kind of surprising, but not contrary to some of the other surveys that have been done with shooting sports teams like this in NASP. So 88% of our kids said they have hunted to some degree. We don't really know what the magnitude is. We don't know how many times they go, or what they might consider hunting. Is it that they walked behind their grandpa in the field? Did they shoot a jackrabbit when they weren't supposed to? We don't really know what that looks like. So all of them, or 88% of them, said that they have hunted. Now, what's kind of cool about that number, and what's shocking more so, is of the 88% that said they've hunted, 98% of them said they have family and friends that hunt and support it. Now, of that same percentage, of the top two barriers, 46% of them said they don't have anybody to go with. And that's just kind of puzzling to me. I don't know how you come from having a background of family and friends who hunt and fish or take action in it, have a trap team of 56 teammates, and have coaches leading you along the way, but not have anybody to go with. So that was something that was really shocking to us, and an even bigger reason why we should engage this population, right? They're not feeling empowered to go out and hunt on their own, and they don't know how to do it. So more so why it matters, this graph here shows the declining population or license sales, not the population. And as we can see, the last line there was in 2009. And so as our baby boomers slowly age out of hunting, we don't have this millennial generation, Generation I, coming up behind them picking up the slack. And so as you can see that line, hunting itself will go away, or it won't look the same way as it does today. And that's just a good reason to kind of gauge this population and try to see if we can make some avid hunters out of them. So youth not exposed to hunting by the age of 18 or 20 years are most likely to not participate in hunting at any point in their life. So we have a really small window, and that's that high school window, right? You hit 18, you graduate, you go out, you get a girlfriend or a boyfriend, you start a job, you go to trade school, maybe you start your career out of the chute, and it's just not something you pursue. A U.S. Fish and Wildlife survey shows that only 5% of the 16-year-olds and older are hunting, and that's half of what it was 50 years ago. So a lot of us who maybe walked a very traditional hunting heritage path, our kids aren't doing that today. They don't have these in-house mentors dragging them out of bed to asking them to go hunt. They're just kind of stagnant, in my opinion. So this is great. This is exciting to engage them, because they're the future of hunting. So really what the grand scheme of this too is, how many of you heard of what R3 is or are familiar with it? Yeah, so some people sometimes know, some don't. So it's a national plan, and its intention is to recruit, retain, and reactivate hunters and anglers. So we're not just facing declining license sales in Kansas, but we're facing it as a nation. And so this is a plan that was implemented by Wildlife Management Institute and the Council to Advance Shooting Sports to really kind of combat that issue. Mike is actually sitting on an implementation plan for the program, and they really come together and correlate ideas on how we can kind of combat this, whether it's with programs like this or maybe it's in other ways, but getting some action on the ground is what ultimately has to happen. So what I love about R3 is as when you hear R3, you think new opportunities, new approaches, and strong partnerships. And I think that's really exciting because it kind of teaches this younger population what's actually out there and how they can pursue it. So our program goals, of course, are going to be to follow into what that R3 actually means. So we're going to recruit new hunters, those who haven't been hunting. We want to retain those kids who say they are hunting. But we also want to reactivate hunters, so we want to kind of engage their parents or maybe their grandparents and get them back out in the field shooting and hunting with their loved ones. Kind of something that I'm more so excited about is really cultivating community amongst the shooting athletes, conservation groups, and mentoring organizations to show them that there is a home for them there. They can have a sense of belonging within the hunting heritage world. And of course, we want to empower these shooting sports athletes to be invested hunters by the time they're seniors. You know, if you think about it, if we can engage a kiddo as a freshman and provide continued hunting opportunities by the time they're a senior year, I think we've probably made a hunter out of them. And they're most likely going to continue on to do so after the age of 18 or their senior year. So that's kind of a little bit of how we'll do it. So what I've been really doing and hitting the ground running and since June in tackling is identifying a lot of these schools that are interested in participating in this program. I'm connecting with a lot of the local NGO groups to gauge their interest and level of commitment. A lot of them are funding a lot of these trap teams, so they see it as a great way to get even more involved in them. Hey, we'll cut you a check for $1,000. You come work our banquet, but we're also going to host a pheasant hunt for you. And that's great. That's a win-win-win right there. It's really exciting. A lot of what I've been doing is trying to locate land and opportunities, and so of course we all know that's hard in Kansas, and so we've had really great luck with Kansas Department of Parks and Wildlife, and have secured some really cool hunting opportunities that we're excited about, and we hope to do this. We hope to continue to arrange these hunts year after year, season after season, and get these kids out. And we've been working closely with our R3 coordinator out in Pratt, Tana. She's been wonderful in providing support to me and Mike, but also just being a really creative wheel for us to kind of spin some of these program evaluations. So obviously data is really important to track if a program's successful or not, or how it can be reevaluated. So we will be doing a lot of pre-hunt surveys before the hunt takes place. We'll do a post-hunt survey and a follow-up survey as well. And these surveys, I'm really excited about them. I think they'll kind of create some really rich data for us and how we can tailor to this population because they're so important to us. So where we're at kind of right now, I've got about 15 dove hunts scheduled for 15 different teams across the state. And we're working on, obviously scheduling pheasant, waterfowl, and have recently had a lot of deer hunt opportunities come available. So we're hitting the ground and getting those scheduled, and it's really fun. So the special hunt opportunities, Mike Nyhoff has been incredible to work with and has been really putting me in contact with a lot of wildlife area managers. And they've come forth saying, I had a special hunt not filled. Do you want to put a trap team in there? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And that's really creating a lot of energy on the teams. The coaches are excited about it, and they share that with their kids, and the kids are even more excited about it. So we're really thankful for that, and I'm excited to see how they go. We're also going to be hosting a lot of shooting clinics and rifle clinics because that's really important to us is safety. These kids are obviously really good with shotguns. We know that, but a rifle is a little different when it comes to the big game. And so is hunt. You know, you might be able to shoot a trap, but you may not be able to shoot a dove. So hopefully some of those clinics will be really helpful. And then to provide some more support, I've kind of come up with a handbook that these coaches can go through with expectations and guidelines. And just, of course, very fluid communication with one another. So we're super excited to see where it goes. I think this is a really great opportunity for Kansas, but also for Kansas youth and getting them out hunting. Thanks, guys. That's it.
Are there any questions?
Hey, Brittany, I would just kind of just add a little tidbit. You had shown the Concordia, two of the Concordia team members, and Concordia did not have a trap club before this high school
You're
trap
right,
team.
yeah.
And so Todd Robinson and Matt Farmer, and they worked with the school, and they worked with the county and the city, and they got land, and now they have a trap club because of this program. And then, of course, it's a great wave and a great thing to get involved with your outdoor mentors program. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of potential here, obviously.
Thanks. Yeah, it's exciting. It's fun to hear Matt and Todd talk about how they got their field going, and it creates a lot of community awareness too and excitement, and that's what I love seeing. There's a lot of game wardens, there's a lot of sheriff deputies, there's a lot of grandparents coming out of retirement to help coach these teams, and they're just excited to see kids off the couch, away from their cell phone, and engaging in a shooting sport that's, you know, safe, that creates a really rich culture amongst their team and also their town, and, you know, really builds a lot of character in these kiddos as well.
Okay,
Thanks, Mike.
well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, microchemistry and fisheries.
This will be another PowerPoint if you guys want
Okay,
to do your exercise a little bit. All right, well, if everybody's set, I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Jeff Cook. I'm the Fisheries Research Supervisor in Emporia, and I'm here to talk to you about a new technology or a newer technology that we're pretty excited about in the Fisheries Division. It's not as exciting as chasing deer with helicopters, but measuring minute amounts of trace elements in fish bones is pretty fun too. So I'd like to acknowledge my co-author on this, Ben Neely. He's kind of the quantitative brains behind these projects, so I want to be sure to give him a shout out. And I also want to just tell everybody that I'm not an educator. I'm going to do my best to explain this thoroughly, but if you have any questions, feel free to speak up or find us afterwards. So to get down to it, what I'm going to be talking today, like I said, is microchemistry. It's the science of measuring these very minute trace elements inside otoliths or bones that we find in fish, and using that information to kind of reconstruct where they've been, what they've been doing, which can inform us on our management scenarios. So like I said, otoliths are tiny bones inside of fish's heads. All fish have 3 pairs of them, and depending on the species or the group or the taxa, they can range from anything from, can people see that pointer there? I can't really point with the laser from here, but this is a freshwater drum otolith. If anybody's ever cleaned some drum and dug into their heads, they have these great big stones in their head, and that's the otolith. But that's pretty atypical. The picture on the far right of the screen, the upper right, is a 5-year-old, 8-inch red ear sunfish otolith. So it's pretty tiny and dainty. And that's usually what we're dealing with when it comes to fisheries in Kansas. The bottom 2 pictures are an otolith from a largemouth bass. And otoliths grow throughout the lifespan of a fish, and like rings on a tree during periods of fast growth, the otolith grows fast. During periods of slow growth in the winter, they grow slowly, and so they put down these annular marks. So does anybody have a guess on how old that fish is on the bottom? It's 5 years old. We're going to count those white bands. This fish was sampled in the spring, so those white bands are in the winter. It hasn't quite started growing in that last spring, so this fish was 5 years old. The picture on your lower left is the whole view otolith. So that's, right when we take it out of the head, put it under the scope, put some light on it. We're viewing that like it is. We can prepare them in a different way, which is basically section that otolith on this plane here through the nucleus, which is this part of the otolith, towards the edge. So basically we're just looking at it differently. But for our microchemistry purposes, we need to get down to that material in the center or the core of the otolith, and we do that through sectioning. So there's a couple different ways of looking at them. So otoliths are bones, so as you might expect, they're mostly made up of calcium, but they also take up these trace elements found in the water and the environment. Anything from strontium, magnesium, manganese, barium. Those 4 elements are the main ones that we're going to be looking at. But wherever a fish is at in its environment, it's going to take up those trace elements from the water. So if it's in a different water source, then it migrates into another one. Theoretically, the otolith signatures should be different at those times in life. So the way that we evaluate this is through a process called laser ablation. So that little red line on that otolith section represents the line or the transect at which that laser is going to burn off just a tiny little section of that otolith. So it's going to start in the core, and then that laser is going to work out through each one of these annuli to the edge. And so that laser is going to burn off a little piece of that otolith, suck it up into a machine, and that machine can measure these different, the concentrations of these different trace elements. Is everybody with me so far? So what we can end up with is data that kind of look like this. So this is a sectioned otolith from I don't know what, but they started that laser transect just on the left side of the nucleus to be sure to get that nucleus to get an idea of where that fish was hatched. And the data on this blue line is the strontium to calcium ratio. So that's the amount of strontium that fish took up from the water at different times in its life. So you can see that strontium ratio was pretty similar for about 1.5 years of that fish's life, suggesting that it stayed in the same place. But then we have this spike in strontium, which indicates a movement to this place, and they didn't stay there for very long. They moved back down to this place where they stayed for the remainder of their life that had kind of an intermediate signature for strontium. So it can give us an idea of where a fish was born, if those fish are moving, where they're moving, and kind of just give us a chronology of where that fish has been their entire life. So I'm going to go ahead and give you kind of a really broad overview of how we're using this technology to manage Kansas fisheries. And I think a good example to start out with is Neosho River paddlefish. If you're not familiar with this fishery, this river basin is probably our most popular paddlefish fishery in the state. Specifically the Chautauqua Dam fishery right here. So we're catching adult paddlefish. We essentially rent them from Oklahoma. During the spring they go on their spawning migrations, and we're catching them either here at the Chautauqua fishery, up here at Iola, or all the way up at John Redmond. And something that I want to note that's different about paddlefish, if you've ever cleaned a paddlefish, they have very few bones in them, and their otoliths are very, very small and dainty and delicate and hard to find. So the structure that we're using for microchemistry on paddlefish is actually in the lower left corner, which is actually a cross-section of their jawbone. It's one of the very few calcified bones in a paddlefish's body. But anyway, you can see the annular marks on there. You can see the focus just like you would in an annulus, or an otolith, sorry. So the first thing that we can look at with microchemistry when it comes to this Neosho River paddlefish is natal origin, which is just basically a fancy way of saying where this fish was hatched. So this fishery is composed of, like I said, fish that migrate up from Grand Lake of the Cherokees, but we also stock several thousand paddlefish in the John Redmond Reservoir every year with the thought that they'll entrain through the dam and contribute to the fishery up and down the system. And we, in Kansas, want to know if this is a good use of those fish. Are these fish actually contributing to a fishery anywhere? So what we can do is go down to an angler that's just snagged a paddlefish below Burlington, and we did that this spring. They had pretty good luck down there. We can ask them for their jawbone, we can take it, we can section it, and we can send it to our lab at the University of Southern Illinois. And they can tell us whether that fish fish's natal origin was the hatchery where it was raised, whether it migrated up from Grand Lake to the Cherokees, or actually where that fish may have been spawned in the gradient of the Neosho River. So it gives us insight into our stockings as well as where our fish are actually coming from, where that fishery is contributing from. I mentioned stock fish identification. We can get down to if those fishes' microchemistry match that of the hatchery. We can also get an idea on broad scale of movements. So the water chemistry along the gradient of the Neosho River can be different in some locations, especially if the fish get up into the Spring River arm that kind of bisects the very southeast corner of Kansas. That has very different water chemistry. So we can kind of get an idea, once we have that jawbone, we can kind of tell where that fish has been in the broad scale movements that it's undertaken. And this last thing here, we can differentiate stocks. So stock is just basically a word that means group of fish. So we can kind of tell, if we go and sample 100 fish below John Redmond Reservoir, we can tell how much of those fish are made up of Spring River spawn fish versus stocked fish versus Grand Lake fish. It kind of gives us an idea of where we in the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation can kind of put their habitat restoration eggs in what basket or stocking eggs. So it gives us a lot of information regarding these paddlefish. The second, or moving on to a different aspect that we can use microchemistry for is our walleye management. Of course, in Kansas, we struggle to find the best way to get, those little larval walleyes all the way up to something that an angler really wants to catch, really wants to harvest, or can potentially be a trophy. And one of the tools in our toolbox is stocking walleyes. And we stock a lot of walleyes in Kansas. Some research from the mid-90s to early 2000s indicated about 85% of the walleyes in our reservoirs were stocked. So we rely heavily on stocking. And as a natural resource agency, we want to do that as efficiently as we can. So whether that's stocking these fry, which are relatively cheap, whether we're stocking these small fingerlings, which are a little bit more expensive, or whether we're kicking out these advanced fingerlings that we're now doing, we need to have stocking evaluations that show us what's the best bang for our buck when it comes to these stockings. So we're going to use microchemistry to figure out whether we stock one of our reservoirs with a number of different stockings, whether those are stocked fish or wild produced fish. And the way that we're going to do that is through microchemistry. But first, we need to get an idea of what our signatures on our otoliths from hatchery fish are, if that makes sense. So we have 3 hatcheries in the state that make walleyes. We have Meade, Pratt, and Milford. So we gathered known hatchery fish from those different hatcheries, sent them in for microchemical testing, and what we came out with was very positive. These 3 different ellipses represent the groups of that microchemical signature for each one of our hatcheries. So the long elongated one was Milford, the one just to the left of that was Pratt, and then the one with hardly any barium in the water or in the signature was from Meade. So it's really positive for us that our hatcheries have these different chemical signatures. And another thing that's very positive are these fish here and these fish here are fish that are known reservoir produced fish. So these are from Marion, for instance, which is very different than anything else. But all these are our other reservoirs, including Cheney, El Dorado, Melbourne, and Hillsdale. So this technique does have promise for allowing us to distinguish stocked fish from naturally produced fish. So what we did this last year, knowing this technique holds promise, is our biologists went out and gathered a whole bunch of fish from Cheney and El Dorado. I'm going to go through an example from Cheney Reservoir fish. So what this represents is 7 individual fish. So this row's a fish, this row's a fish, this row's a fish, etc. On the left side of the screen is our strontium to calcium ratios. On the right side of our screen is the barium ratios. So these are the raw data that we get from the lab. And these are the data from along that laser ablation transect from the nucleus out towards the edge, right? So what we're looking for to insinuate that we're looking at a stocked fish is an abrupt change in any of these ratios. So like this one, for instance, would lead us to believe that that may be a stocked fish, perhaps this one. And the barium concentrations also lead us to believe that. We do need quantitative proof of this, however. So what Ben went ahead and did was he created a model, and what that model ends up looking like. What we found out is this, and this it's kind of like a dichotomous key. So we look at our barium first for these concentrations. If the barium is less than 18, we go this way. If it's more than 18, we can tell that that fish was from Milford Hatchery. If it's less than 18, we go further on and check the strontium levels. If it's less than 726, that fish was naturally produced in Cheney Reservoir. If it was more than that, it was produced in Mead Hatchery. So we can kind of follow. And Ben built this computer model, and what we end up with is our results like this. So each one of these horizontal lines represents this fish, for instance. So we have 7 lines here, 7 lines here, and due to the variability in that data, we're not going to get 100% confidence every time, but for the first 5 fish, we were 100% confident that those were assigned to naturally recruited fish in Cheney. This fish 205 represents this one that, looking at it, we kind of thought would probably be a stocked fish, and it turns out that there's a 2/3 chance that that fish was raised in Milford, similar to fish 207. So this just kind of gives us an idea of how we can use this in the future. Not only can we distinguish if they are hatchery-raised fish, we can distinguish which hatchery they came from. And those two are stocked fish. A third project that we're using this technology on is something that is a project we're collaborating on with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, examining the Asian carp population in the Kansas River. As you guys probably know, Asian carp are an invasive species. They compete with native fish for food resources, and they can also pose kind of a risk to public safety and boaters. They're the ones that you can see on YouTube jumping out of the water in Kentucky. We have them in the Kansas River, and we really don't know much about their population. So we're going to use some of this microchemistry technology to determine where they're coming from, where they're going. The results of this are really preliminary. We asked the graduate students at Nebraska for some data, and they came up with this. And I think it kind of illustrates the point of how we're going to use this. So the graph on the top is one fish, and the graph on the bottom is the one fish. I'm going to put some red arrows on there. That's where the laser ablation started and went through the nucleus, okay? So what we can tell from this top fish is it was spawned somewhere that had a strontium to calcium ratio of about 3,000, whereas this fish on the bottom, that ratio was probably only about 750. So although these fish were collected together in the Kansas River, they were spawned in different places. And the ratio that we found for the Kansas River is around 1,500. So these fish weren't spawned in the Kansas River, but they did end up there. Some other things that we can determine, basically this fish on the top was spawned somewhere. It went somewhere different for quite a long time. It almost looks like it went back to that same place, maybe on a spawning run, we don't know, but ended up coming back to the Kansas River until it was caught. And this fish on the bottom was in a completely different place than that first one spawned. It kind of hung out there for most of its life, and then it made a kind of a migration up into the Kansas River until it was caught. So although these fish were caught in the same place, their life history of what they've been doing, where they've been going, is completely different, which is kind of interesting. So the information that we can use from this to manage these populations is it gives us an idea of exactly what the Kansas River is providing for these fish. Is it spawning habitat? Is it nursery habitat? Based on these two fish, I mean, we're going to have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these samples that we're going to analyze, but it appears that these two fish anyway, aren't spawning in the Kansas River. This one on top may have been using it for nursery habitat as an age 0 fish, but we'll know more and have more resolution as time goes on. This information will allow us to prioritize locations for management, whether that be barriers for these fish. Right now, the Bowersock Dam serves as a barrier. We don't have many of these fish upstream, if any. This will prioritize areas for removal and also habitat modification to try to keep these critters in check. It also gives us an idea of of the migratory nature of these fish. I mean, we knew that they move, but we don't really know how much. We're not just dealing with a Kansas River population. We're probably dealing with the Kansas-Missouri River population, or even Kansas-Missouri-Mississippi River population. But hopefully this information can give us an idea of the scope of the population that we're looking at to better collaborate with other agencies to help solve these problems. The final project I'll just give you a quick update on is a sister project to the Asian carp project. This one's in regard to blue catfish. The blue catfish fishery in the Kansas River has really improved and increased in numbers and quality in the last few years. And we don't really know why. It's happening also in the Missouri River. And one of the hypotheses that we have is, we've been stocking a lot of blue catfish in our reservoirs, and potentially entrainment through the reservoirs of our stockings are contributing to the increase in the Kansas River population. These are all the reservoirs that we've stocked, anywhere from Wilson to Glen Elder, Canopolis, Perry, Tuttle, Milford. So we'd like to get an idea if the fish are basically washing out of the reservoirs and contributing to this really high quality fishery in the Kansas River. And so how can we do that? Well, we can use natal origin from microchemistry. So the graduate student from the University of Nebraska is traversing the Kansas River, grabbing blue catfish and running the same laser ablation on those otoliths, try to figure out if our reservoirs are actually contributing to those populations. So that'd be good to know if they are, and it'd be also nice to know when, because we have that chronology of the fish, we'll know approximately what age they flushed out, what year they flushed out. Are they coming out in high water? Are they going out on spawning forays? Are they looking for something different that our reservoirs don't have? So that'll give us some information about how to better manage these populations. Secondly, we stock blue cats in several of these places, but quite frankly, in some they don't really seem to be taking for whatever reason. It could be that our populations are just flushing out once they're stocked. So if we end up with a bunch of Tuttle Creek fish in the Kansas River, that can kind of help us prioritize that maybe Tuttle Creek isn't the best place to be putting our stocking eggs in that basket. And also it'll help us determine if the Kansas River is a source for blue catfish or a sink population. Again, it kind of gets back to that multi-jurisdictional management. Do we need to get with Missouri Department of Conservation if we're essentially sharing a fishery with them? Standardized regulations and standardized management would probably be good. So those are the four kind of projects that we have in the hopper. We do have a lot of future plans for this technique, including increasing sample size. There is a lot of variability in that data, and adding more data points to those data are really going to decrease our variability, increase our power to say something about these populations. We also want to determine how fast these new signatures accumulate, and this can lead us to a number of different questions. And hopefully, in my mind, we could stock fry, fingerlings, and advanced fingerling walleyes in the same population in the same year, and hopefully determine which of those fish came from which individual stocking, and we'll try to get to that. The blue catfish and Asian carp projects on the Kansas River will be done in 2020, so here in about a year we should have a lot more data on those. And we would like to collect some more paddlefish structures from up and down the river. Unfortunately, that's a highly variable fishery, and we're getting our structures from angler caught fish, and people can have a really good day at Burlington and then it's done the next day. People can have a really good day at Chetopa one day and they're gone the next day. So we're going to continue to add to that data set to see if we can better manage our paddlefish populations. And finally, we need to work on determining some other uses for this microchemistry technology. We've had law enforcement approach us and ask us if we can tell if a certain group of poached fish came from a certain population or whether they came from another population. There are some references in the literature for the technology to be used for this. But as I showed on that one graph, at least for walleyes anyway, they all seem to land right on top of each other except for Marion. So I guess law enforcement guys, if you get some poached walleye from Marion, we can maybe tell you that. But other populations right now, we're not going to be able to. And finally, we can potentially use this for sources of invasive species introduction. So if white perch show up in New Lake and it's the founder population, we can potentially take that otolith and determine where they came from and kind of shift our A&S priorities to preventing the spread from that population. So, went through that kind of quick, and it might be kind of confusing, but if you have any questions, I'd be glad to stand for them.
Anybody have any questions? I had one, was the term entrainment the key when they go through the dam?
Entrainment, yeah, suck through the dam.
Any more questions? Very interesting. Not sure I understand it all, but interesting. Thank you. Doug?
If I can get the lights turned back on here. Might have to have some help on that. Oh, here we go. There we go. All right, well, I would like to talk with you a little bit about an award that we recently received from the Midwest Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. And if you don't know much about the Midwest Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, there's 13 states and 3 provinces. It starts kind of bordered by the state of Kansas, the province of Saskatchewan, all the way over to Ontario, and then south to Ohio. And those are the states that make up the Midwest Association. It's one of the AFWA regional associations for the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies at the national level. And each year, the Midwest Association has between 5 and 6 awards that they issue. Most of them, all but one, are issued to individuals. They have a fisheries biologist of the year, a wildlife biologist of the year, a law enforcement officer of the year. But there's one award that is looking at the best projects on the ground, fish and wildlife projects in the Midwest part of the United States and Canada. So that's called the Excellence in Conservation Award. And we submitted a nomination for one of our programs here in Kansas. It was our Certified Aquatic Angler, get this right, our Kansas Certified Angler Instructor Program. And this is a part of our aquatic education efforts that the Fisheries Division and the rest of the agency helps us with as well. Back in 2010, we developed a federal aid grant to really ratchet up our aquatic education efforts. We have a sport fish restoration grant. At that time, it was 75% federal, 25% state. In 2012, we had a major change there in that we partnered with an organization called Fishing's Future. And Fishing's Future started in Texas, and these are people that just want to volunteer to help people learn and to appreciate and enjoy fishing. And we had a guy from Texas that was a part of the Fishing's Future down there. He moved to Kansas and came to us and wanted to partner with us and began a really great partnership with Fishing's Future. So Fishing's Future has what they call master anglers, and what we use them for is they train the trainers. So we have a curriculum on how to conduct aquatic education events. The Fishing's Future people put on these classes that volunteers can take the training, go through it. We do background checks to make sure those are the kind of people we want working with Kansas youth. And then we issue an official certification card to them, and they can then go out on their own or assist us with our aquatic education events. And so I think our first event was in Wichita in 2013, and since then we have had over 500 volunteers that have gone through the program. So it's been a really great program. It's really similar to the hunter safety program, except that it's not a mandatory program. Like if you want to hunt, you've got to go through hunter safety. The kids that we reach on this program they're doing it because it's something that they want to do. They're not going to have to do that in order to participate in fishing like they do on the hunting side. So a few things about our aquatic education program. Since 2012 we now have doubled the number of aquatic education events that take place in Kansas as a result of this partnership that we have. And there was a recent multi-state study conducted by Southwick and Associates that attributed Kansas's volunteer program as a positive impact on fishing participation in Kansas. So we've been recognized nationally and actually moving the needle in creating more anglers through this program. Also, we're able to record the volunteer hours and use them as the state match for our federal aid grant. so that we now really are getting 100% funding for this program without having to subsidize it with the Wildlife Fee Fund. So it's a 100% reimbursement because we get to count the 4,000 or so hours of volunteer time as the state's match. I think we do that also with our hunter safety program, as I understand it. So that's been a great program that frees up some of our Wildlife Fee Fund to do other things like stocking and managing fisheries in other ways. So the last thing that we've done with our aquatic education program is we recently hired David Breath to be our sport fishing education coordinator to work full-time, not only with our staff on aquatic education stuff, but being a real support for these 500 volunteers that are out there and a liaison with Fishing's Future for our certification program. And David's working very closely also with Tana with our R3 efforts. And so we see our aquatic education effort working hand in hand with the agency R3 program. And David's going to be doing a lot of great stuff, I think, over the next year or two with that as well. So that said, I would like to have Brad come and present the award that we were given by the Midwest Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies to David, and David would be representing the agency as the lead on this effort.
Special treat. I got to be surprised at the meeting in Ohio when they presented this to us. Fortunately, David wasn't there at the time, so I'm really appreciative of your work and thanks for your great effort. And as Doug said, we look forward to the future.
Okay. All right, electronic licensing.
I hate to do this, and it's maybe not even worth the trouble because I have some screenshots of the new app, but I'd have them on a PowerPoint. You'd have to get up and go back out in front again. We're in the very early stages of the development. If you are interested in seeing what some of the screenshots of the new app look like as far as the
Would you like
licenses.
for us to see them?
Yeah, I do. I mean, all right. Is that the mouse? Show me how to get this open. Is that? So I'm going to dim the lights here. That's pretty cool. And then, I want the e-license. Wasn't sure how they were getting that cursor.
Might have to have Sean help us get the file up.
Oh,
Okay, there we go. Okay, we got it.
So we're in the test phases right now. And what you can see there is what a license would look like. Again, it'll be an electronic license. You'll have an app that you'll be able to download onto your smartphone or your mobile device. This is just a combo hunt fish license like this. It's also got a barcode that a conservation officer or game warden will be able to read that and scan that and get information on other issuances that you would have. It would be a very convenient system. It looks like it's going to be designed the way we wanted it to, where you'd have a username and a password to get in, and you'd have access to all of your licenses. We're looking at e-tag coming up as well. This would be the list of all of the issuances that you would have on file that you could go in and look at and see what you have. Again, it would be this would be your smartphone down here. You can see them, but you'd have the navigation would be pretty simple. We're also going to look at merging this with like our iSportsman, where you would check in or check out of the wildlife areas that would require iSportsman. Hopefully, the iWeha would also be merged with this eventually as well, where you could check in, check out, and this would be a deer permit. You'd have your deer permit. This shows a general resident any deer. This shows a general resident any elk. but you would be able to report. The E-tag, we hope we'll vote on this in November, and we will have this ready to launch as far as your hunting and fishing licenses and other annual permits by January 1 of 2020. Then we would follow that up with a few more regulatory things that we'll have to clean up, and then we'll hopefully will have the E-tag ready to go by the spring turkey season. And this would just say your harvest has been submitted. So the process would be, especially on deer, where you may take a photograph of the deer, you put the county, the date, the time of kill, you submit that, you would be given a confirmation number that would be your basic, your transportation tag. You'd keep that confirmation number with, if you took it to a locker plant, you would write that confirmation down. That would stay with the deer when you left. This would be like a check-in. Instead of county here, that would probably be a wildlife area. So if you were going to Texas Lake to hunt ducks, you could check in, you could give the time, then you could check out. This again would say how long you were there. A lot of times on those, the iSportsmen, we have their harvest. You may have a harvest record, number of birds taken, animals taken. It'd be very similar to what we're doing with iSportsmen. And that's all I've got at this point. Licensing section and various people are still testing this now. We don't have a brand yet. We don't have the way it's going to look. It'll be a little bit flashier than this. It'll be a little bit more attractive to that, and we'll come up with something that'll be an all-encompassing app. So again, Chris has been working on the regulation changes that are going to be necessary that we'll need to vote on in December or in November, right?
Yeah, November will be for the e-license and then the e-tag, depending on how quickly it's moving through.
Okay.
Either be November or January.
Okay.
Any questions for Mike?
I assume, Mike, that Chairman Gerald's grandson will be able to log in under his password and help him work through all this.
You can show him how, but I think it's going to work where you could have multiple issuances in one billfold. So if you did have youngsters that the parent could have them on there. It could be the other way around. Gerald's grandkids may keep his licenses for him.
Yeah, truth hurts.
Yeah, like somebody who's got a lifetime license that'll automatically upload, or
Well, it would show on your account. So if you had a lifetime license, when you went in and looked at all the issuances that you have, your lifetime license would be listed there.
okay.
That'd be the same for the Native American hunt and fish?
Yeah. Now, that's something that we'll have to talk about whether that's going to be in your billfold or that it will be in your accounts. But I haven't asked Shanda that, if that would just automatically go into your billfold and be permanently placed there. But you would imagine that it would.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Ed?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, no PowerPoint.
Okay.
Again, we workshopped the 5-year review of Kansas threatened and endangered species. In fact, we will workshop it again next meeting. And then finally in November, the Commission will finally get to vote on the changes that are recommended. Just a reminder of the recommendations for the threatened and endangered species list, which is in our Regulation 115.15.1. We are adding one species there and removing one. We're removing the arc darter, and it will be downlisted, which is a good thing, downlisted to 115.15.2, which is our list of species in need of conservation. Our acronym for that is our SYNC list. We will be removing one freshwater mussel from the sink list also, and we will be moving one species from the sink list, the cylindrical paper shell, from there to be uplisted to endangered. So it'll be moved from 115.15.2 to 115.15.1. In addition, we'll probably update any changes in nomenclature that we note, just as a bit of housekeeping. And if you want to dig deeper in the substrate on these species, we have a repository of information on our KDWP&T website with the original petitions, the expert panel opinions, and any pertinent publications on those species. Lastly, since the last meeting, we are required by statute 32-960 that we notify the governors and surrounding states of our intentions, and we've done that. We've also sent a letter to the League of Municipalities and the Kansas Association of Counties on these possible listing changes. So with that, I'll take questions.
Any questions for Ed? We'll have one more workshop.
Yes, September.
If there's no other questions, we thank you. Go ahead, Doug.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I'm going to go over the regulation changes for next year. The first one that I wanted to discuss has to do with the reference document, and for those that don't know what the reference document is, it's where we implement length and creel limits, primarily length and creel limits, that are different than the statewide regulations in order to really fine-tune our management and improve the quality of fishing in Kansas. And I hate to do this to you, but we're going to have another PowerPoint presentation. So if you'd like to see. We have a proposal that I think is really unique, and I asked Craig Johnson, the fisheries biologist for the kind of in the Flint Hills area. He's got El Dorado, Marion, Butler State Fishing Lake, down to Winfield to the state line. But Craig came up with what I think is a novel approach to harvest of walleye and managing walleye at Marion Reservoir that we'd like to show to you and let him talk to you a little bit about. This would be a reference document item. It's in the briefing book, and it would be for a 21-inch minimum length limit at El Dorado, at Marion Reservoir. That said, I'm going to try to dim the lights again here if I can figure it out one more time. And Craig, I think we're good to go. If we can get your PowerPoint going here.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thanks for having me here today. I don't get to come and talk at these very often, but it's always fun when I get to do this. But I've got some stuff about Marion Reservoir I'd like to share today, and I'll try to make it pretty quick here. Just a short recap, Marion Reservoir was constructed, finished up in 1967. It's about a 6,100 acre reservoir. We've got about 60 miles of shoreline there and a pretty small watershed. It's only about 200 square miles, so sometimes it can get pretty dry there, and other times we can get quite a bit of water going through there like we did this year. It's located about 46 miles northeast of Wichita. Well, as far as popular fish populations that we've got there, we've got channel and flathead catfish. There's crappie there, pretty good crappie. There's some largemouth bass, not very many, not really known for much of a bass fishery at Marion. And then we've also got the walleye, white bass, and wiper. The current walleye population there, we've got good numbers of walleye. It's been that way historically. There's nothing really going on bad there. It's a consistent from year to year fishery, usually pretty reliable on that kind of stuff. And the fish there for walleye are good, fat, healthy fish. We've got good growth rates, and fish seem to get good sizes in a good amount of time there. It's a unique walleye population. Marion is one of only 3 of our Kansas reservoirs that has natural recruitment going on there. So historically, we haven't had to stock that on a regular basis to keep the population at a level that anglers find attractive. Even though we don't stock it, like I say, the recruitment's working well. People keep coming there. Walleye keep growing there. And recruitment for a lake like this is a lot better than having to stock it all the time. It's not an additional drain on our hatchery system. The fish are just getting it done by themselves, basically. The history of the harvest limits, not too long of a list here. Before 1989, there was no minimum length limit at the lake, and we only had had 8 a day creel limit on it. 1989, I think we went to a statewide 5 a day. So Marion picked that up back in 89. And then in 1992, an 18-inch minimum length limit was adopted at the lake, and with the 5 a day, it's been that way since 92. So long time with no changes there. Really busy graph here. Big thing I want you to look at is the blue line going along there. Starts in 1987, runs through 2018, so we're looking at quite a few years on this. Kind of a gradual downward trend on that. Again, it used to be back in the early 90s, kind of response to one of the floods they had over there, drought and then a flood. Lots and lots of fish were coming off. A little bit of stocking going on there in 92 and 93 as well. About 2010, you see a big drop there. That's not necessarily a true reflection of the population density there. That's when the department or division changed up the way we sample our walleye with our fall test netting, so that's not a real drop right there. The red bars showed the stocking, and most recently we had some stockings go in 2016, 2017, and 2018. And the reason we put those in there was try to counteract a little bit of that reduction in density we had going on there. So we stocked 4.5 million fry in 2016, 5.5 million fry in 2017. 2018, we got 4 million fry in, and for the first time in the history of the reservoir, we were able to get in 81,200 fingerlings went into the lake. Well, the big question is why change it if everything's good there, if fish are growing well, why mess with it? Well, we still get a lot of reports from walleye anglers when they go out, especially after the big push of walleye pressure. May and June, a lot of the fish that the guys are catching out there, the anglers are catching, are right at that 18-inch length limit, just a little bit under it. We want to provide better walleye angling. We want people to catch more fish and also have some better harvest opportunities instead of all those fish being right at 18.25 inch or 18.5. Kind of shake things up with that a little bit. We'd also like to increase natural production through increased brood fish numbers. Our brood fish are normally our larger walleye. Once they get up around 22, 24, 25 inch, that's where you can get a lot better production with those larger fish. And we also want to more effectively utilize this population's potential. Again, those fish grow quickly. They're good, fat, healthy fish, and I think we can get a little bit more out of this for our anglers. Well, why do it now? Well, part of that reason is we've been doing the same thing at the lake for about 28 years with that 18 and 5. We've had a pretty big shakeup in 2019. We went from about 4 foot low and went up to over 8 foot high. So there's some stuff going on where we could have good numbers of fish because anglers didn't have as much access to the lake. There was only one open boat ramp this year, so we could have a lot of fish to work with. But on the flip side, if we lost a lot of fish with the releases and everything, it might be a good time to shake things up with that and help those fish out that will be left. We won't know exactly what we've lost in the lake until we do fall test netting when we roll back around to October, November, so it'll be a little bit before we know how it's looking for this year after the big flood. So there's the big flood. That goes back to October of 17, and during that period in the growing season anyway, grew a lot of good terrestrial vegetation up on exposed mud flats. That makes for great nursery habitat for those fish when the water comes back up to it. And then you can see right there, you hit about mid-April, first part of May, I guess, it popped up pretty good. And those spikes on there, there was 3 all-time record high water levels hit at Marion Reservoir during that period. So yeah, it was certainly an odd water year at Marion this year as well. Well, the current regulation options that we have in the, we'll call it the walleye toolbox for the state of Kansas, is we have a 15, 18, or 21 minimum length limit option. Creel limits, we can either have a 2 a day or a 5 a day. Most of our anglers are pretty familiar with those. Look at the length frequencies for walleye over the last several years at Marion. And again, like I said earlier, there's a pretty good distribution of fish at the lake. We've got small fish coming on. Again, most of that's from natural recruitment. We've got a good number. If you look at just to the right of that white line's the 18-inch minimum length limit. And right to the right of that, you can see the 460 millimeter length class. We've got a pretty good number on that. The only thing I can figure with that is those are the fish that have been picked over a little bit during the course of the growing season. And then our fishery, walleye fishing pressure drops off a little bit, and then we sample in October, November. Those fish grow a little bit more when most of the walleye anglers have left, so that may explain why we got a big spike right to that. We're catching them after they've already grown a little bit, after most of the walleye anglers have switched on to other activities for the year in September. And then larger fish, we do have larger fish. I think the biggest ones on this one's right up around 27 inch, right around in there. So pretty good mixture of sizes there at the lake. Just for comparison, this is when El Dorado had an 18-inch minimum length limit. So you see 2 white lines. The shorter one, or the one on the left there, is a 18-inch, and the other one's the 21-inch. So this lake shows a walleye fishery that had a little bit more pressure on it. You can see it's a little more cropped off. Anglers were out there working those fish over a little bit more. Marion doesn't have that much pressure. We just don't see them get cropped off as quick as what they do at some of our other lakes. But again, larger fish available, good numbers of smaller fish coming up. But here's the big switch. We went to a 21-inch length limit back in 2010 when the white perch showed up, and we wanted to use the predation abilities of the walleye to work on those white perch. And the big thing you can see is we filled in those gaps pretty good between those 2 white lines there. So also had an increase in the amount of larger fish we had in the lake as well. So this just tells me we're able to impact our fish species even in these larger reservoirs through our fish regulations. Well, the new approach, we're looking to use growth phases and harvest phases to improve the walleye harvest size that our anglers are getting. Again, instead of just having one length limit for 28 years, see if we can shake things up a little bit. On the grow phase, we're looking for a little bit more restrictive harvest regulation, provide protection for 1 or more growing seasons for those fish. And the biggest thing with walleye and big walleye is, in order to have a big walleye, they have to have time to get big. And basically that's what this grow phase would allow, is a little extra time for those fish to reach sizes that we know that they can reach. And then again on a harvest phase, this is going to be a less restrictive harvest regulation period. It's going to allow harvest of those fish previously protected during the grow phase. So starting in 2020 and beyond, we're looking at a 4-year pilot study. And what we'd like to do at Marion is implement a 21-inch minimum length limit for 20 and 21. We want to allow harvest of 18-inch fish again starting in 2022. Keep an eye on this. We want to conduct creel surveys to monitor the pressure, catch rates, harvest and catch size structure to see if we're actually making a difference with what these anglers are catching out there, and see if their catch rates are going up as well. Normally you would assume if you've got more fish in the lake, anglers should be catching more fish as well. And we'll also continue our standardized fall test netting to see if the population's changing in the way we think it should. Also want to collect angler input, again, to see if our anglers are liking what we're doing out there, because if our anglers are happy, we're happy, and if our anglers aren't happy, we've got more work to do. So basically just recapping what we're looking at doing, again, when there's the circles there, that left one, that's that area we're really hoping to fill in when we go to a grow phase. And then we want to slide that back and allow the harvest of those 18-inch fish again. So work on filling in those gaps between those two white lines, and hopefully another side addition on this would be to increase the number of those brooder fish over there in that right circle as well. So the more brood fish we've got in there, the more bigger fish we've got, the more production we've got, the more walleye we have overall in the lake. So more fish for anglers to catch. And with that, I'd take any questions.
Anybody have any questions? Okay. Good.
Thank you, Craig. So Craig's got an approach here that I think is pretty interesting in that we can get some benefits from a delayed harvest, protect some fish, but then allow for some harvest on down the road. And so I think there's some merit in doing this on a pilot project. And at the end of this pilot project, we could assess whether this could be a tool that we could use elsewhere in the state. If you think this out to the future, if this is successful, it could be a situation where we might have multiple lakes with 21s, and then every year we might have a lake opening up with the ability to harvest, so that we don't have to just sacrifice those 18 to 21 inch fish in terms of what the anglers are wanting every year.
What were the other two lakes besides Marion that are relatively self-sufficient?
Cedar Bluff and, help me out, Wilson.
Wilson, okay.
And it's kind of interesting too, what I think is worth mentioning is that we put the 21 inch minimum link limit on Cheney Reservoir and had never had a history of natural reproduction at Cheney to any extent, that is my recollection. And if you remember in Jeff's presentation, we did see natural reproduction at Cheney now, and that could very well have been from the protection of those fish and allowing more big fish to contribute to the natural spawn there. So that's a little bit of information there that supports the 21. I think the science is definitely there that the fish will grow. They'll move into that slot, and we're getting additional information to show that it might be having an impact on our egg production, and also the ability for us to see natural reproduction and survival of walleye without having to stock. So in a perfect world, if we could get more lakes to become self-sustaining, that would really take a lot of pressure off the hatchery system.
You will get some anglers' complaint, but I think in the long run, we'll all be better off, and they will too.
Yes. And I might just mention, we had talked about how we would implement the harvest of the shorter fish, and we could just go to an 18-inch minimum link limit in year 3 or year 4, or we could use the new electronic tags and let anglers harvest fish that are sublegal through a tagging system. We've been discussing the possibility of doing that, but that's a little ways off yet. But we'll have a new tool available to us that would allow us to take that kind of approach as well. The nice thing about a tagging system is you can distribute that harvest a little bit more equitably, because each angler would be able to just use a certain number of tags, and we'd spread it out more equitably on the fish that are between 18 and 21. So we've got a lot of work to do before we get to that point, but that is an option that we're looking at. Could be the simple approach, could be just to lower the link limit, but it might be better to look at another alternative using our new e-licensing and our e-tagging system. So back to the reference document then. So that would be one of the changes that we're proposing is to implement the 21 at Marion. We also have a 32 to 40 inch slot link limit in 2 per day at Wilson Reservoir on blue catfish with no more than one over 40 inches or larger. We got a new lake at Agra City Lake that we want to implement a 15-inch minimum link limit and a 5-a-day creel on channel catfish. Sterling City Lake wants to change the link limit on saugeye to a 21-inch minimum. John Redmond Reservoir wanting to add a 35-inch minimum link limit on blue catfish as we're trying to establish that population. Ridley City Lake, we were going to remove the 18-inch minimum link limit and 2-a-day creel on largemouth bass and revert back to the statewide reg of 15 inches and 5 a day. I think the population's stockpiling on us a little bit. We want to promote a slightly different harvest regime there. The mined land area, we've got a proposal to remove the 20-inch minimum link limit and 1-a-day creel limit on brown trout, and we're doing that because we're having problems. That lake had been able to support trout in the summertime, but something has changed down there, and our biologist is doing some work down there to try to assess what is going on with the temperature oxygen profiles in the summertime to see if we can ever return back to a year-round trout fishery there. Then Neodesha City Lake, 15-inch minimum length limit and 5-a-day creel limit on channel catfish. And that takes care of the changes in the reference document for the next calendar year. Any questions about any of those? I want to thank Craig for taking time to explain his idea. This is a pretty neat idea. I think it's well thought out. I appreciate him coming and sharing his thoughts with us.
Agreed.
Yes.
Okay, you want to go on to the next one?
Okay. 115.25.14 to decrease the daily creel limit on rainbow trout to 2 per day at Salina Lakewood Lake. This was done at the request of the Salina Recreation Department and our law enforcement division because of issues we have with people coming in, getting a limit of 5 and coming back and getting another limit of 5. And so one of the ways to address that we think that would be beneficial is to reduce the creel limit to 2 a day and then try to catch these people that have been abusing the daily creel limits at that particular location. Any questions about that?
Yeah, which one was that?
That is Lakewood Lake and Salina.
Oh, okay, I see it up here. Okay.
Yep. Okay. Ready to move to the next one?
Yes.
115-7-3, fish taking and the use of bait fish and minnows. We want to expand the restrictions on the movement of bait fish to include other aquatic animals such as crayfish, leeches, salamanders, frogs, and mussels. And this is to prevent the unintentional and spread of invasive species by moving these critters around. So that would be this would be an important part to strengthen our invasive species control and management program.
What the current restriction, can you recite what it says?
Currently, wild-caught bait, you can use it where you catch it, but if you want to move it from one place to another, the only thing we allow you to move would be bluegill and green sunfish. So,
Okay, define move it where you catch it. Can you
can't
catch it on the river here and go down the river? And
you can't put it anywhere it couldn't have gotten on its own power. So downstream from where you caught it, but if you moved it up and used it in above a low-head
Above a dam.
or you went to another drainage, it would be illegal.
Is the law specify that?
Yes.
To where it would be clear, because that's going to solve most of the crayfish issues, because most people are going to catch crayfish someplace where it would be probably fairly close to where you're going to use it.
Yes.
So
We've been operating under that for probably the last 3 or 4 years.
I remember that. I just didn't know.
Right.
Okay.
Any more questions on 115.7.3? Okay. 115-7-1, fishing, legal equipment, method of take, and other provisions. When we set up the float line program, we wanted to make sure that people would use float lines or jugs that could not contain water because we didn't want them to get water from a contaminated lake and then take those jugs and use them in another location where they could spread zebra mussels. But we didn't take care of the jugs that trot line fishermen use. And so what this would basically do would be hold the trot line anglers to the same standard of making sure that anything they're using for flotation for their trot line, especially at the far end, usually they might anchor it to a tree on one end and have a jug on the other end so they could identify where the end of it is, that they're using things that can't contain water as well. So that this would just standardize the use of floats in passive gear like trot lines and set lines.
Will this be workshopped one more time?
Yes.
Not that anybody's going to have any complaints about this, but if there are concerns among crayfish seiners or something, they have another opportunity to come state their case.
And there's one more item that's not on here, but that is that we have revised the A&S designated waters list. Last year, or recently, we discovered zebra mussels in Lyon State Fishing Lake. So Lyon State Fishing Lake is going to be added to the designated water list, and all the waters immediately downstream that will also be considered to be positive because we know the villagers are going to move downstream on their own. And that is the only change, I believe, to the A&S waters this year. We did have another one that came in recently, white perch in a lake in Wichita. but we don't have time to get that to the Attorney General. So we're going to go ahead and post that as infested with white perch, but we will not get it in the document until next year. Any
Okay, are
questions?
there any questions for Doug? Okay,
Okay, thank you.
Linda?
Mr. Chair, while Linda's coming up, I might mention, I really appreciate the creativity of Craig out at Marion. I think that's a great idea and great initiative. I think it also offers up an opportunity for engagement, right? When anytime we're making a promise to anglers, we have the opportunity to fulfill that promise, and in between we got to update them and educate them. And so I think this is a really neat advance for us and a nice opportunity. So I appreciate all that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, and visiting public. Again, I'm presenting today park regulations, and Brittany's presentation today really come into why we're would like to have free entrance for our school districts to get into our state park systems. Actually, it came to light because of some of these groups that wanted to come in and they didn't have a permit. And so we feel like we want them to be able to use our facilities when they have these tournaments. And the questions been brought up about private schools, we'll do those with a special event form, but we want them to be able to come in our state park systems with free of charge. And so that's what this one is, and we will vote on it maybe later. November. Gotcha.
Okay.
And if you have any questions on that, I'll be glad to answer that now. Okay, my e-bicycles. I brought a demonstration of one today from Eric's down the road. E-bicycles, these are getting to be so popular. And I truly believe it's an electric pedal assist. And I truly believe on our Flint Hills Trail and our Prairie Spirit Trail, this is going to be something that will have many people use. They're pretty pricey right now, but it provides the ability to give someone a boost as they pedal. And I brought one, and Aaron has decided to go ahead and just demonstrate this here today. But as you pedal, it's not noisy. And I think we had someone say last time they're noisy. They're not noisy. You don't hear it. It's an electric bike. It can go about 60 on a charge, 60 miles. This one's a casual user, as you can see from the seat. And they have them a little more sporty for the avid bike rider. But I truly believe this is going to be something that's going to be very useful, especially on our Flint Hills Trail and our Prairie Spirit Trail. And I will answer any questions and certainly allow you to demonstrate if you'd like to. Very good.
Write it, that's all right.
Oh, that would be great.
I understand.
Absolutely.
Yes, please.
My name is Kurt Ratzlaff, and I'm with Kansas Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. And I guess I'm just here to provide a counterpoint, just more food for thought, I guess.
Sure.
I would say. Because there are some concerns.
You're good. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to admit, it kind of struck me when I read the comments that you had last time, and I was looking at the proposed regs, and it's like, it almost sounds like we're trying to say, okay, from now on, we're going to take this dog and we're going to call it a cat, because we've got a motorized thing here, but yet we're going to call it a non-motorized thing. And it just kind of, that got me thinking a little bit, to be honest with you. And I have been aware of e-bikes for a while, and Ms. Landerman, you're right, they're coming.
Yeah, they are.
There's no question
They're
about
already
that.
allowed on the street,
Correct.
so,
And I
in
understand.
our park roads.
Correct. And what my concern is in regard to these is that this industry is evolving quickly. And the papers that I gave to you are statements from U.S. Forest Service and BLM that basically say that. They've had a lot of experience dealing with this, with the e-bike situation. They have decided to call them motorized vehicles primarily because it's evolving so quickly that you can't make enough changes to keep up with it. This bike is kind of what started, was one of like let's like a casual user, I think is what you said.
Right.
The ones that are more sporty, that she was referring to, have shock absorbers. They have more powerful motors.
They can go up to 29 miles an hour.
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
right.
It used to be that they could only go 20. Now they're up to 30. A few years from now, they're going to be patting us on the head. Oh, wasn't that quaint that they were talking about 20 and 30 miles
It's
an
pedal
hour?
assist, though, so
Not all of them.
the ones,
Nowadays, there are e-bikes that you can purchase that they have changed the beast. You can sit on it, turn the throttle, and you go. And it has basically become, the pedals are an option. You can use them basically to extend your battery life. And it's just part of the evolution of the whole e-bike phenomenon.
Sure.
And the Forest Service, like I said, and the BLM have both decided to just sit back and take a breath, call them motorized for now, and kind of see where the industry goes. Because they're going to do nothing but get faster and more powerful. That evolution and the mass production of them also allows them to be marketed to the younger crowd. So now instead of a nice cruiser out on the highway or on the roads, you've got 16 to 25-year-old guys seeing how fast they can go down the trail or off trail because they're non-motorized vehicles. And it's just kind of a slippery slope kind of deal. We were talking earlier with the dogs that track down deer, it's best to start slow and then see where it goes. And then if you want to drop the leash, great. Can't put a leash on these once you unleash them. And my concern is that once we call them a non-motorized vehicle, then to call them a motorized vehicle for other purposes is a difficult proposition. If we call them motorized, then we can take a breath and see if there are specific places where we want to allow this type or that type, and we can make specific regulations for that. But to make a blanket statement that it's a non-motorized, when it's sitting here with a motor and it can go 30 miles an hour off-road, is a problem in non-motorized areas. Because we've got to think, yeah, it provides some access, but again, it's evolving. We're going to have to provide protection for the other people that are in the non-motorized trails or areas, that sort of thing, when we get to that point.
Sure.
And it's hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube once it's out of there.
the ones that we're talking about you have to pedal to make the motor work. So it's not like a motorcycle, and you have to pedal all the time while this goes.
And the enforcement people out in the field are not able to tell the difference between the ones that they have now, where you can just sit on and go. It's hard to tell the difference, and it's going to get harder. It's going to continue to evolve and get harder.
Sure. The state of Kansas actually has a definition for motorized in our laws. What is motorized, what is a UTV, and what can be on the streets. And so this one is just, as it says, a pedal assist only right now. I understand where you're going, and I've actually researched it through other state park systems that are allowing them. So it may change if it goes to completely motorized, but they have to pedal this as they go, or it won't go on the motor part.
and it's hard to tell the difference.
Okay, thanks.
If you're visually trying to enforce a law out in the field, it's visually difficult to make that determination.
Sure.
And like I said, as we go on down the road and they get bigger, and not bigger, more powerful and quicker and faster, and you've got them out there with people, and the people are operating at human speed, and now you've got something at motor speed in the same area, and that's a difficult situation.
Well, bicycles can go fast,
I
but
understand.
these are a pedal assist, so they do have to pedal. I don't want you to confuse the subject that it's like a motorcycle, because I have one of those too. It's not. You have to pedal it to make it go.
Okay. We vote on this when?
Next time. Yep,
It's public hearing next time.
that's right.
Do they have different sized batteries on like the ones that, the
Not
pedal
that I've
assist and
seen.
then?
Actually, I'm going to bring a guy that sells them, that's on the Flint Hills Trail next time. But this one I got at Eric's Bikes today, so you could see it.
And this, like I said, this is a road cruiser. You look at the off-road, the e-mountain bikes is what they call those. Like I said, they have shock absorbers, they've got big fat knobby tires, and they go 30 miles an hour.
I have friends that have no motorized bicycle and they go 30 miles an hour.
I understand.
Okay.
I understand. But we're talking about enabling more and more
Sure.
people to do that.
That's right.
Creating more and more situations
And getting them outside.
and getting them outside.
That's right.
And
Yep,
protecting the people who are already there.
right.
Okay.
That's all the stuff we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Brad?
Yeah, Linda, you mentioned about other states and how they've responded to these. Has there been an attempt to put some limits or specifications
Not-
on these bikes to
Not
keep a
yet.
lid on it?
Not yet, because as they said, they haven't made all those changes yet. We're all still going as it's e-pedal assist. So they have to pedal to make this one go. And it's 29, it'll go to 29 miles an hour. Now, I have friends that are mountain bike riders, and they go more than that, but they don't have a motor on them. So it just depends on who you have. Our target is to get an older generation or people that maybe wouldn't normally ride a bicycle, get on the Flint Hills Trail and ride.
Any other?
They're already on the streets. They're legal on the streets now.
Any other questions for Linda?
Linda, is there a way to restrict them to those longer trails like the Prairie Spirit Trail versus having someone out there on one of these on a long trail at Canopolis where there's horses and other things where the speed and the stock can be a problem?
The only thing is just remember, I have bike users. If we're going to start restricting, you've got bike users that are going as fast with no motor. So
That's on a downhill versus a flat. There's some significant differences
But
in where
there-
those speeds occur.
This does have a way to slow this down. So there's a mechanism on there to do that. So I just would caution you, because we'll have regular bike riders come in here and say, hold on, we ride that fast.
Well, we've been talking about this for
We have.
quite a while. So
Yep.
Doug, do you?
I just did a little research on my own, found some interesting things, and my understanding is that the federal government has a 28 mile an hour restriction, max cap on speed for an e-bike.
Yeah.
If they're built to exceed that, then they become a motorized bike, not an e-bike.
If they're pedaling, it can go up to 29, if they're pedaling.
Yeah, but if they're capable of
Right.
of 30 miles an hour, then they no longer
But your regular bike can go,
classified.
your regular,
That said, you can go online, you can order kits that basically up the speed dramatically, so, it's the fact that they're being manufactured, there's people out there hot rodding them, to gain more. And, like I told Linda, found out there's for $200, you can get a kit, it's basically a new front wheel. It's got a motor, and it has a throttle control that you clamp. It takes you like 2 minutes to make your regular bike into an e-bike. it's not a pedal assist e-bike, but it's
That would be different, yeah.
yeah, well, I have to agree with Kurt that I think that, the industry is gonna be pressing to allow faster, allow, well, you let us do this, you might as well let us do that, and I hate the term slippery slope, but I think that, we need to move cautiously, on this, and I'm certainly not opposed to the concept of it, but, I'm personally concerned that there, of where we might end up. As a point, I can remember back in the day when we had legalized fiber optic sights on muzzle loaders. And the rationale is that 80% of the muzzle loaders sold have fiber optic sights on them. And, and I don't think the market should be leading the regulations. I think the regulations need to control the market, if you will. That's my 2 cents.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right. Kent, were you planning to be around after the meeting? Not after the meeting, the evening session? Well, it may take us, we may have to run over 5 o'clock if we have this one, and I don't mind doing that. It may or may not be that quick, but I know there's a series of questions, and I have several, so does anybody care if we run over 5 a little bit?
That's fine.
All right. Come on up.
No, you got 10 minutes.
Huh?
You got 10 minutes to get this done.
Yeah.
I do have a PowerPoint number 17 of this. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the commission, we're here today to talk about KAR 115, 25, both 5 and 6, the spring and fall turkey bag limits, and season date recommendations. And I'll try to be relatively brief with this. Relatively quickly, first, the turkey season date recommendations for 2021. As just a quick reminder, the youth disabled season in the spring starts on April 1st. Archery begins the Monday after the first full weekend, and then the regular begins the Wednesday after the second full weekend in April, and then in the fall, open from October 1st through the end of January, with the exception of the firearm deer season. And for 2021, that's what these dates look like, right? So the regular season starting on the 14th, and then the changes, or the firearm season in the fall. So there's no recommended change to the turkey season dates in regards to the 2021 seasons. On to the turkey harvest updates. We'll quickly run through, these were the season dates during the past year, the 2018 fall season and 2019 spring season. Overall, in terms of the fall season, we did see a slight decline in the number of permits sold, which 1 permit per hunter. It was about 800 permits that we dropped. About 77% of hunters are actively pursuing turkeys during that time, and about 20% of our fall hunters are non-residents. And just statewide, again, we've talked in the past about the decline in active hunters during the fall season, and of course the related drop in harvest during that time period as well. And then specifically, we've talked about hen harvest, which makes up approximately 1/3 of the harvest each year statewide, and ranges from just under 1/3 to about half, depending on the unit that you're in. And of course, the big season concerning the spring weather, this year has been the weather, right? Which from state parks to lake levels has been a concern for the department. And so briefly, these are the totals that we saw during the spring. Overall, the reds and the pinks indicate more more rain than the greens and blues. So that was April, and I guess I'll go back to April again when our spring harvest season begins. May, when another big portion of our season occurs, but also you start getting into the nesting season. Our peak is somewhere in the kind of that mid-May. Mid-May to mid-June is the peak hatch for birds in Kansas. And then June, we started to taper off finally a little bit, and a little drier July. But more importantly, and especially in the eastern portion of the state, we always have some issues somewhere with flooding, typically fairly localized. But this series of images depicts the departure from normal. And so in spring, and basically when you get into the oranges or the pinks and purples, you're talking about 6 to 8 inches per month above average. And so April, we see that in the southeast portion of the state especially, and then all across Kansas, right? In May, and then starting again to taper off in June, although as you can see, we have spots of really high precipitation even through June. So point being there, that spots that were affected all the way from May all the way through June, and then started tapering off a little bit statewide in July, but having some big impacts in the southeastern portion of the state. And so that impacted a number of things that we're going to talk about. The number of hunters in terms of access, just the desire to hunt during wet, sometimes cold conditions, the effect it might have on birds, especially nesting, and how those things interact. And so overall this year, one of the big stories just in terms of permit sales is that we were down another 31% in overall permit sales. So this is number of hunters out on the landscape. And that's a continued decline over the last several years. Proportional change also with game tags. And then I'll just briefly mention that just of note that Unit 4, the Southwest unit, did have an increased number of applications this year. So we only give out 500 permits in the Southwest. But we had a number of people just express to our biologists that they were surprised they didn't get drawn. So that was kind of interesting. And typically in the last 4 to 5 years, we've averaged 35 to 40% of our spring turkey hunters are non-residents, and that's declined down to the 32% this year, still a fairly high proportion. And so that's what this looks like in a graph. And so basically, the middle line there is the number of spring turkey hunters that we've seen each year, and you see that slow 5-year decline that's really accelerated the last 2 years. And then what that looks like with the top line in this graph is the number of residents, and then the bottom 2 lines are the non-resident hunters that are out on the landscape as well. And so up until this past year, we've seen pretty steady numbers in terms of non-residents, but certainly reacting this year. And then if you put and we'll talk about this some more, but if you look at the overall 10 to 15 year numbers for turkey abundance on the landscape, hunters are responding to fewer birds on the landscape and not buying near as many permits. When we look at the harvest this year, we're significantly down again, 24% decline in harvest this year, obviously very correlated with the number of permits and hunters that are out there. Everything else was generally proportional to what we generally see. But this is what it looks like in that long-term trend. Only 4 or 5 years ago, in 2015, we had our peak harvest in Kansas of over 36,000 birds. We're now at less than half that at 17,000. And we've seen a subsequent decline in hunter success as well. And so again, we're remaining relatively high. Last year we were 43. This year we're 47% overall hunter success in the state, which is pretty darn good when you look at the states around us. But you do see that somewhat longer term trend. And just overall during that 13-year period, we've seen a decline of 27% over time. And again, since about 2004, 2005, we see that overall decline in hunter success, which of course we're having increased number of hunters early on in that period, but we see that really tailing off the last few years. And to spend some time in this, so now we're on to our population trends. And again, this is measured through various methods with our rural mail carrier survey. And if you look on the right side, you see the overall turkey abundance indices for the state. And especially since about 2008, we've seen a decline in overall turkey numbers in Kansas. And one of the explanations of that is on the left. We'll start on the top, and this is young per 100 adults. And so if we assume something like a 50-50 ratio of males to females, then we would look at about 50 young per 100 adults as a replacement value, right, of one bird or one poult per hen. And as you can see, long term, we're declining past that. And point being that in terms of production, we're not replacing the number of hens on the landscape. And then the bottom left graph that I'm showing here is poults per 100 miles, which I haven't shown you in the past. But this index just shows so again, on top in young per poult, young per hen, even if you had reduced number of hens, you would expect that to maybe stay relatively high depending on a good year. But if you have declining numbers of hens and overall numbers of birds on the landscape, that's where we see that bottom left, poults per 100 miles. We're just not seeing the poults out there on the landscape, which again, as we see on the right side with the overall number of birds, we're having fewer birds. And so the graphs now, as we move, well, I'll just summarize the west, central, and eastern portions of the state. In general, the turkey abundance is on the top right, and then the poults per 100 miles is on the bottom right. And so, especially again here, you see the declines since the early 2000s. And when we have southwest Kansas looking like northwest Kansas, I think we've got some issues in terms of the amount of precipitation that northwest gets compared to the southwest. And then where we really see the decline certainly too is the central part of the state. These are some of our consistently higher turkey densities, especially in the north central. But as you can see in the very bottom right in the graph, we're getting close to no production this year, as expected from the extensive rain. And that's mimicked very well in the eastern portion of the state. And I'll note too that, well, how it comes across there, but in the top right graph, the dotted line is the southeast portion of the state, the southeast unit. That actually goes up and off the graph. We had really high numbers of turkeys in the early 2000s, and those experienced some of our highest declines more quickly. And so as you look at that through the last 10 years, you don't necessarily see that. You see kind of a flat line. But point being, it's a sixth or a fifth of the population that we had before. And again, extremely low poult production this year is what we're anticipating. Overall, satisfaction is shifting over time. These are the last 5 years for the state, and then when you look at the longer term, the last 15 years, hunters are starting to become more dissatisfied. And of course, I will note too that the more dissatisfied you are, the more likely you are not to hunt in subsequent years and therefore not get surveyed. But this is concerning to us in the long term in terms of hunter participation and just satisfaction with what we're doing with turkey management. And so overall, just to summarize this, we've seen a really big decline, 31% in number of permit sales and hunters on the landscape, and that's helped translate into fewer birds being harvested this year. Again, 47% hunter success, but hunters are telling us that they're not seeing as many birds. Overall, we expect really low production this year, and that's a continued trend over the last 15 years here, and that's extremely concerning. And again, we just got fewer birds on the landscape. And again, this is going to be exacerbated by the amount of rain that we got in May and June this year. Really low expectations for production this year. And of course, with turkeys being a relatively long-lived species, we're going to have effects from this year for the next 2 to 5 years. And so from that, we develop our recommendations utilizing the harvest strategy, which we've talked about, and as we've talked about in the past, Either we've had a couple options in the past in terms of either removing or suspending the fall season in affected units, or going to a one spring and one fall bird in those units. But we have also progressed now and stayed below those thresholds in a number of units for a sustained long period of time. And so this, as you recall, 55% resident hunter success is our threshold, which we've got depicted here. In the Northwest, Unit 1, we were above that threshold, so we're taking that off the table. But we're moving forward with recommendations in terms of reducing hunter opportunity in the Northeast, South Central, and Southeast units. And with that, because it's been such a sustained decline in hunter success and relatively low, we're going to focus on those. And the staff recommendation is to drop to one bird in the spring and suspend the fall season in those 3 units. And so with that, again, those are the staff recommendations for bag limits for next year. And then, as I mentioned earlier, sticking with the recommended season dates for 2021. And with that, I'd be happy to take questions.
Okay. I have a serious questions, Kent. But last summer, most of our discussion was about fall turkeys and fall turkey season, and I believe the opinion was that the current level of fall turkeys probably at that level didn't, fall turkey harvest didn't necessarily affect the population because it was so minimal. Is that sort of your recollection?
That yes.
Okay. On the 20th of January, the Wichita paper, some 60 days after a decision was made, put forth an article in the paper, and then 6 days later, the Associated Press picked it up. And what I suspect was an effort to create facts to support a headline. One quote, and I'll quote from the Associated Press article. Fricke said a single fall turkey hunting season could eliminate tens of thousands of turkeys from the state breeding population within a few years. Did you make that statement?
I did not. And if you look at the Wichita,
it's not in there.
It is stated in there, but not that I said that. It's just made as a statement.
Well, and I'm glad, because that wasn't the way I remembered any of our discussion. And what that did was kind of create a bit of a misstatement. And I just didn't remember you saying it, and I kind of wanted to clear that, because I read the Wichita part, and then I went back and looked at the Associated Press and noticed where you were attributed to being the quotor. Do you think that by eliminating the second permit in the spring, that hunter satisfaction will improve?
So as we've discussed in the past, I think for every individual out there, there's different measures of satisfaction, right? I believe that hunter success will improve over time, which again, we measure hunter success only based on the first permit anyway, right? But by eliminating that second fall tag, turkeys being a relatively long-lived species, there will be more adult toms on the landscape in subsequent years by removing that game tag.
The game tag, the spring game tag.
Correct.
Well, and I understand that. I think that there's not enough fall turkey hunters to make any difference as far as the public getting too fired up. There are 42 states that have a fall turkey season. The 8 states that don't, one of them doesn't even have turkeys, which is Alaska. And I've tried to get a handle on every state is having the same decline that we're having. We're not alone in this. The percentages are very similar. And, you know, when numbers are up a little bit, then more people go out and buy permits. When numbers decline, people sense, they hear, and it goes down. You know, we had a few more fall birds harvested because we had a little bit of an increase. I don't see other states responding to the degree that you're recommending, which is closing a fall season that is probably becoming more, it's certainly not becoming less of a sport nationwide. And I don't see other states responding with a reduction in birds. Now, you may be right that if you ration the harvest of toms through the adaptive harvest strategy, you may have more birds to be picked up next year. But there's going to be a lot of disappointed people, and there's going to be a lot of public feedback by shutting off the second permit in the spring. I can just kind of hear it now. People are going to say, well, other states have had deterioration. They haven't reduced it. Not taking the second tom won't create more numbers. It just spreads the harvest out a little bit. I want you to consider between now and the next meeting whether it would make sense to kick the can down the road and reduce the trigger for the adaptive harvest strategy to like 45% instead of 55. I think it's 55 and 60. That was established back when we had turkeys in some zones off the graph as an alternative to shutting down the second permit. If we think, and the commission thinks, that we need to be that reactive, I think we should tie the spring second bird and the fall birds together, and if we're going to close one, we close them both, because the unenlightened public would not understand taking the second spring bird away and leaving a fall harvest, even though the number of hens statewide is probably 400 or less. I just think there's going to be certain areas, you're going to have people contact you, Aaron, about why are we having only one permit, because we've got a lot of turkeys in my area. Well, we're saying if you may have a lot of turkeys, but the general region may not have as many, so we're going to take away that opportunity. I think we really want to think a little more about that rather than react as a result of the adaptive harvest strategy. What do you say?
I mean, to me, as we've discussed in the past, especially last year, the harvest strategy has tracked these declines over time. And so I have a real hard time dropping the threshold as a result of not having a desire to drop in those package recommendations.
Incidentally, I believe your numbers are right. I believe they are tracking the reduced number of birds. I don't have any disagreement with that.
And I will also, as we've talked in the past, I do believe that we are conservative in what we're trying to do with our turkey population. And as you know, we can go back up, certainly, but bringing these recommendations forward, my primary concern is I don't know what the bottom is yet. And as we see those continued declines statewide, and certainly within some specific units that we've outlined here, it's really hard to say, and to me, really hard to reference other states and their recommendations, because certainly we have difference in overall amount of harvest, number of hunters, all those associated things, and just the way our turkey population is reacting to things on the landscape, changes in the landscape. And so it's difficult from my perspective to make changes to the management strategy without seeing some change in the resource first.
And I think that what the other states are doing is they're perhaps allowing some culture and tradition to guide them a little bit rather than strictly by the numbers. And I'm saying if we decide to go that route, you're going to get to really explain your adaptive harvest strategy to an awful lot of people who aren't going to understand it or agree with it.
Yeah. I think the discussion is great, and I appreciate both perspectives. I think Kent and his cohort of scientists have done a really good job of examining this, and we've had hours of conversations. I know he's tired of me asking him questions. But to address your comment about what other states are doing, because of all these perspectives, I have talked with some other state directors, and one in particular whose name I won't mention, but is just east of here, a couple miles, and is a really good turkey hunter and a really good administrator. But I had this conversation with her, and my question to her was, because I was trying to discern if they were making their decisions, which have basically been to stay pat, not make changes, compared to the thoughts that we're having about some restrictions, what that decision was based on. And the response was, yeah, I know our numbers are declining, because they are, and I've talked with Ken about these trends from east to west as they're moving through. I was trying to figure out what they're basing that on, and I think it is based mostly on culture, from what I can tell. Because, I mean, we take a lot of pride in and hire really good biologists to do these evaluations and tell us what the science is telling us to do. But ultimately, you have to blend that together with culture and the politics and all these other factors you're talking about. But my sense over there was they are hesitant to change because they know they'll get a lot of pushback. So my question to them, it would be the same question I have for us, and I know we have some months to discuss this. My question was, okay, so tell me at what point you've gone too far and you do have to restrict harvest, and they don't know. They don't know.
But when you're talking, I'm going to, for sake of this discussion, put fall turkeys because it's an immaterial number at this time. And we're talking about the second tom turkey, the game tag. We don't increase the resource by restricting and rationing the harvest. The resource is going to do whatever the weather and the habitat will allow it to do. We're not making more turkeys. When we manage for deer, we have a big opportunity to control populations by harvesting females. We don't harvest enough females in the state for turkeys to make any difference. And so all we're doing to reduce the second permit is to just ration the birds, but we don't make any more birds. So I'm not sure we're damaging the resource as to where we say, oh, we should have done it earlier, because now I think the numbers are going to go down or up no matter what we do as far as harvesting toms. That's just my opinion. What some of the rest of the commissioners have to say. I think you're right. I think all the other states are doing it because of culture. I think culture is important.
Well, what I see a little bit is our hunters are self-regulating some. Whether it's enough, you might say, well, it's not enough because we need to put further restrictions on there. as our populations go down, I would see their self-regulation become more apparent as well with that. So that's where the balance comes in. Do you allow the culture and the tradition and the hunters self-regulating to be precedent, or do you take a more aggressive approach? And I don't know.
Gerald, are you more passionate about the fall season or the second spring tag?
Probably I am, because if we get rid of the fall season, it'll never come back. There'll always be a reason to wait a year, and public outcry is probably going to cause the second game tag to be available. But what I would propose that we do, if we do it, would probably be to couple them together and follow the recommendation of closing them both at the risk of not having them come back at the same time. I don't think the fall season makes any real difference, and I think it's a completely different type of hunt. And I think it's something that is good for the state to have it, and most states continue to have it, irrespective of the numbers. Just not as many people do it. Most people think beards in the spring and antlers in the fall. So I don't want to see the fall season go, but if we do it, if we follow the recommendations, maybe we should go ahead and do it with both of them. But I'm not sure I agree with that.
When are we voting?
Well, we don't vote for a while, but these things have a way of, there is a recommendation based on good science and good math. It's not likely that Kent's going to say, oh, I've changed my mind, let's reduce the triggers. We're going to be where we're at. We're going to workshop this in the same format in September. We still don't vote, but we're in November, I guess we would vote, and what everybody on a committee tries to do, you want to pluck the goose with the least amount of hissing, so how can everybody get what they want and not give up too much? I don't know. What do you think? You're not a turkey hunter.
Yeah, I have a lot of people that are turkey hunters, and it's a popular sport, but I guess I don't understand fall turkey season. I don't.
No, it's different, and it's
and I know you're passionate.
Popularity, I think.
Do turkeys? Okay, we talked about. Back when I got on the commission, pheasant population was way down, and we were getting lots of people. We went on a pheasant tour. We got lots of people that said, "Hey, we need to reduce the amount of pheasants that we're taking per day." And the biologist said, "Well, we're not killing hens, so that's not going. It's not impacting how many birds that we have." Is that the same with turkeys, or are turkeys different because they live longer or have different predators? Or can you explain that a little bit more in detail for me?
Yeah, so in general, I complain about turkeys not being small game, upland birds, and not being deer. They're somewhere in between. They're relatively long-lived, and so you have multiple potentials for reproduction, right? Not only in 1 year, they're potentially more likely to re-nest, but also over time, right? For 2 to 3 years generally. And so you have that potential by taking out, for example, a loss of one hen is of course extrapolated over those potential few years. And they have a bunch of eggs in each nest, and so they have the potential for relatively high levels of reproduction relatively quickly. And so in that way, they're long-lived like a deer. So by taking out a female, for example, that has a lasting effect. But if they also have the potential that if they're successful at reproduction, then they can be successful in a number of years and bounce back relatively quickly. But my caveat to that is that as you've seen in our Kansas data, and this is true to states, a number of states, I would say nationally, is that we're seeing really questionable production everywhere. Missouri, for example, I'm coming back from a meeting with them, that they're not replacing the hens that they have, and we're not replacing the hens that we have with our current levels of production. And so that's extremely concerning to me.
I did some calculations, not being very good at math, but I sort of took the fact that, you know, we harvested 350 hens, and to analyze how I think it compared to the misquote that was in the paper, we have an average of what, 1.5 at the best and 0.8 birds per litter now?
Less than that. We're talking less than 0.5.
Yeah, so you take 350 birds out of the state. What difference? Well, each year they produce 0.5 times 0.5 squared. I mean, it doesn't amount to that much. That's in defense of the fall season. Everybody's having the same problem. My suggestion is probably what we ought to do, and we can still have more discussion. I think the commissioners ought to kind of poll some of their constituents, see what they think. Not so much about fall turkeys. I don't think it's going to make a lot of difference, but about the second game tag in the spring. And see what they think. I think Secretary Lovelace needs to talk to some people. I think he needs to at least see what tourism, the governor's turkey hunt, some of these other people, what they have to say. That's not the decision we're going to make, but whatever decision we make, one way or the other, is not going to make any more turkeys. Turkeys are still going to decline probably for a while until they bottom out. So whatever decision we make is not going to make us have more turkeys on the ground.
And to that point, like as I mentioned last year, in reducing the fall season and this change in the spring that's not going to fix everything, like we talked about. The intent is to diminish the decline and keep the low higher.
And maybe to create more turkeys running around out there for the one guy with one permit, who he can take the other one that somebody missed or didn't shoot with the second permit. But it's not going to create more turkeys, which is why I'm having a hard time voting in support of either of the suggestions. But I'm not going to state a position super firm yet, because I want to see what the constituents have to tell me. Any of the rest of you have another idea? I mean, we're not going to solve this today.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And the vote's in November?
Yeah. We'll have another one of these spirited discussions again here, so.
A couple of quick points, just to emphasize too, which I didn't say. Of course, the Unit 1 and Unit 2, the Northwest and the North Central, are still open under this recommendation. If it were to pass, would still be open with two permits in the spring and one in the fall. That would still exist in the state. And then to your point, as you mentioned, other states have not made changes as they've seen turkey decline. And the result of that, in terms of hunter satisfaction, which you had asked about earlier, is that you're going to see lower hunter success rates over time. And by that, some examples of 17, 20 to 30% as opposed to what we have. And again, as you mentioned, I believe too, we will continue to decline, but it's can we keep that level of satisfaction and engagement relatively high?
But wouldn't you say that the majority of our turkeys are in the eastern part of the state?
Through the north central, south central is a large number of birds, especially
even
historically.
though we may have an opportunity in north central or northwest Kansas, because those numbers are still high, the number of permits are low, the number of harvests relative to the rest of the state may not be very high, but the percentage is such that it stays above the triggering points. but there may be 20% as many birds harvested.
We're all looking for a sign, trying to read the tea leaves, looking at the numbers and everything. The other thing I'd point out, don't forget, as you're contemplating this over the next month or two, about the precipitation we experienced this spring. That is truly, we all recognize was anomalous, right? We all recognize that will be a significant impact on production this year, and that will have this ripple effect. And so that's one of the things that, as I've been listening to the arguments, that causes me to pause, just anticipating a real impact of.
Well, I think there will be a real impact from it.
Kent, I'm curious, are your counterparts in those other states, are they making the same recommendations to their commission?
Not necessarily. And of course, very few, in fact, none, especially to the east of us, have any kind of a strategy like this in place. For example, Nebraska has a stated goal of 50% overall hunter success in their spring season. And that's identified in kind of their 5-year strategic plan. However, they don't have any strategy associated with if that drops below that, what do they do? So, in my opinion, we're in a beneficial situation where we have a strategy outlined that, as we've talked about in the past, straightforward and biologically based in what we're recommending and when we recommend it. And so, again, I have full faith in this strategy to guide us through that. And so, to your point, I think that other states lack that ability, and I think there's certainly concern at a number of levels, and maybe I'm just overly conservative in my recommendation, but there's nothing that I've seen from other states' data and trends to tell me that this shouldn't be a next step.
Okay, and I think you're right. I think the other states do not have that. And I applaud us for trying to think ahead, but whatever we do, it's not going to create more turkeys. We can have an anomaly of a very unusually wet year, and we can explain why, but reacting to the statistical triggers won't offset that or create more turkeys as a result. And that's where I'm kind of struggling in.
But it will harvest fewer turkeys.
It will harvest fewer turkeys and will make the few turkeys we have last a little longer. All right.
What year did the state go from 1 spring tag to 2?
I'll have to look back. I don't have that.
Well, that might be important for the next discussion. No, it wasn't 20 years ago.
Oh, it's been long.
Been that long time?
It's been long.
30 years ago?
Yeah.
Might be interesting to see what your population was, when you were at 1 and why you went to 2, and compare it to what we are today.
We can do that. The caveat I'll put to that is that as any wildlife population increases, the level of reproduction is higher, right? When you're on a decline, we see that lower reproduction rate. And so point being, the value of an individual that's harvested when reproduction is high is less to the overall population than it is when you have a declining population. And so we can certainly look at that, but I would argue that that's not directly comparable on the downside versus the upside.
We've got more turkey hunters now, too, than when we did when we moved from 1 to 2.
We have more turkey hunters. We have more efficient turkey hunters.
Okay. Any other questions?
What would be wrong with leaving the fall season but making a tom, a bearded bird, same as it is in the spring? You'd still have your 2 seasons, but you'd protect the hens.
That's been suggested because a lot of the fall turkey hunting methods is the ability to bust up the flocks and call them back in. And if we thought that it would make even more sense if we had a material amount of hens harvested.
Yeah. Of course, most of the fall turkeys are killed over feeders.
Yeah, maybe. And so.
Like most of them are.
I'm going to propose that we recess at this point unless some of you commissioners have any additional questions.
Doug Phelps from Manhattan. I'm troubled by this whole thing. We have a declining population, and there's no way to make it go up with, first we have to stop the decline. We can't just wave a magic wand and it starts going back up. So the first thing we have to do is react to the decline, which I think that's what the department is arguing for. The other thing, anybody that follows us all knows that spring weather is a major variable in reproduction. We can't control that. We can only control the variables that we can control, and that's the seasons in the bag. So I think we it may not be a perfect solution, but it's at least a partial solution, until proven otherwise. I just want to say that I was raised as a conservationist first and a hunter second. And I was taught from a very young age that being a conservationist means that you sacrifice your own short-term wants for the long-term benefit of the resource. And I think we need to keep that in mind. Everybody wants to go out. They want to be able to hunt everything whenever they want to. But there's times when the resource can't tolerate that. And if we're really serious about being hunter conservationists, we need to keep that in mind.
Okay.
All
right. As I think about this, we've got to do something. Archie Bunker always said, Edith has supper at 6, whether it's ready or not. So we got to do something. I propose that we recess the meeting. And Kent, thank you. And you'll be hearing from us some more. So we'll reconvene here at 6:30.